Ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about something that happens behind closed doors. When no one is watching, but everything is changing. It's the moment when someone disappears from your life. At first, there's a mix of relief, confusion, and perhaps even hope. But then reality hits. What happens when someone you've opened your heart to, someone you thought you'd never lose, vanishes? It's not just the absence of their presence. It's the absence of everything they represented. Today, I'm going to share 10 brutal truths that women realize when you disappear. These truths don't just sting, they transform her. And in these realizations, you'll understand the gravity of your actions. When you were there, everything felt different. There was comfort in knowing that no matter what the day threw at her, you would be there to calm the storm. Your presence was a soft place to fall, a grounding force that made the chaos of life bearable. It wasn't that the world around her was perfect, far from it. Life, as we all know, is full of its challenges, unexpected setbacks, disappointments, and the relentless pace of a world that doesn't slow down for anyone. But when you were by her side, it was like she had a shield, a safe space where she could breathe, let go of the noise, and be herself. But then you disappeared. It wasn't just a physical absence, it was the loss of that anchor, that constant that helped her weather the storms. And as she sat in the quiet aftermath of your absence, something shifted inside her. That place of safety, the one she once relied on, was gone. Imagine a person who has spent years finding peace in the sound of a familiar voice, in the reassurance of a warm touch, and in the shared silence that spoke volumes. She was never alone, even in the toughest moments, because you were there. She could count on your words to make sense of her feelings, your touch to remind her she wasn't too much, your laughter to remind her that the world wasn't as cold as it seemed. In those moments, your presence was a balm for every wound life had inflicted. But then it all vanished, just like that. In the absence of you, the world she once thought she could conquer started to feel unbearable. The chaos she once managed with your love now felt like an overwhelming tide that kept pulling her under. It wasn't just that she missed you. She missed the sense of calm and clarity you provided. Without you, she was left to navigate the whirlwind of emotions and responsibilities alone. And it wasn't easy. It was like she had been handed a map without any directions, a compass that no longer worked. She felt lost. But here's the thing most people don't realize. Losing that safe space didn't just affect her in the moments she needed you most. It seeped into every corner of her life. Every conversation felt empty because she was missing that one voice that always knew how to fill it with meaning. She looked around her circle of friends and saw them continuing on with their lives, but she was stuck in a loop of doubt and loneliness, unable to shake the feeling that something was missing. People could talk to her all they wanted, offer advice, make her laugh, but no one could offer the peace you once gave her. When life got hard, when stress, grief, or anxiety reared their heads, she didn't have the one person who could remind her that it would be okay. She didn't have the person who could say, "You've got this," and truly mean it. She didn't have someone who would just listen without judgment, without trying to fix everything. You were that for her. You were the one who created a space where she didn't have to be perfect, where she didn't have to carry the weight of the world on her own. You gave her permission to feel whatever she was feeling without fear of being misunderstood or dismissed. And then, without warning, you left. That safe space, the place where she could be vulnerable and real, vanished. It's not just about the physical absence of someone you love. It's about losing a part of yourself that was deeply intertwined with another. For a woman, when someone becomes her safe space, it's not just emotional, it's psychological. She begins to feel like her entire world is falling apart because the very foundation she relied on is gone. Now, she's faced with a choice. Does she let the chaos take over, or does she rebuild? At first, rebuilding seems impossible. There's a part of her that doesn't want to move on, doesn't want to let go of the safe space you provided. She feels like she's been left to figure things out on her own, without the tools or strength to do so. But as time goes on, she begins to realize something profound. In the absence of your safety, she finds her own. It's not the same as what you gave her, but it's hers, and that makes all the difference. She learns to rely on her own inner strength, her own sense of purpose. She becomes her own safe space, the one person who can offer herself the comfort and reassurance she once sought from you. There are days when she misses you terribly, when she yearns for the peace you brought into her life. But in those moments, she also realizes that the strength she thought she lacked was always inside her. It was never about you. It was always about her. And that, my friends, is the most powerful transformation that happens when someone you love disappears. They may have been the safe space you ran to, but eventually you realize that the greatest safe space you can ever have is the one you create within yourself. And once you find it, no one can ever take it away from you again. The process is painful, it takes time, and it's not without its struggles. But in the end, she becomes stronger than she ever thought possible. And while she'll never forget the peace you once gave her, she learns that peace doesn't need to come from someone else. It comes from the strength you find within, the resilience you build in the face of hardship, and the love you learn to give yourself when the world feels like it's falling apart. The pain that follows when someone disappears from your life is not just the absence of their presence, it's the suffocating silence that fills the space they left behind. We live in a world where sound surrounds us at every moment. Conversations, music, the hum of technology, the noise of our thoughts. But the silence that follows abandonment is deafening. It's the kind of silence that isn't just quiet. It's full of everything that was left unsaid, all the things that were never voiced, all the questions that were never answered. You see, when someone leaves, it's not just their body that's gone. It's the sound of their voice, the warmth of their laughter, the comfort of their touch. All those little things that made you feel seen, heard, and understood vanish. In their place, there's a void, a chasm that feels impossible to fill. But the worst part isn't even the physical emptiness. It's the emotional weight that silence carries, the questions that echo in your mind, the unresolved feelings that continue to haunt you in the quiet moments. Let me give you an example. Think about a time when you were in a relationship and everything seemed to be flowing perfectly. You talked every day, laughed about silly things, shared dreams, and even the uncomfortable silences felt safe because they weren't awkward, they were shared. You knew deep down that no matter how chaotic life got, this person was always going to be there to catch you when you fell. But then one day, without warning, the connection that once felt so secure begins to unravel. The texts get shorter, the calls less frequent, and suddenly there's nothing. The silence begins to creep in, slowly at first, and then it grows. You sit in the quiet, wondering if it's just a phase or if something deeper is happening. But the silence answers with nothing but more silence. The person who once filled your world with their presence is now absent, leaving you alone in a deafening quiet. That silence is not just painful, it's confusing. It leaves you with a million unspoken questions. Did I do something wrong? What happened to us? Was I not enough? And because there are no answers, those questions spiral, twisting around in your mind, taking root in the deepest corners of your heart. You don't just miss their presence, you miss the feeling of certainty they gave you. Their words used to be your anchor, their love your comfort. Without that, everything becomes uncertain, like trying to navigate a dark room with no light. This is the kind of silence that hurts the most. It's not just an absence, it's an unanswered void that forces you to confront all the things you don't know. It's the silence of words that should have been spoken, but never were. The times they should have reassured you, apologized to you, or simply told you they cared, but never did. The silence becomes a language all on its own, and it speaks of neglect, of avoidance, of things that were never dealt with, of things that should have been said, but were left hanging in the air, never given the closure they needed. For a woman, silence can be more painful than any argument or confrontation. A disagreement can be resolved with words, with dialogue. But silence is the absence of closure. It's a constant nagging presence that makes you second guess everything. You find yourself wondering, was I not worth the effort of an explanation? Did I not matter enough for them to communicate? The silence takes over, filling every moment with uncertainty. And it's in those moments that the pain becomes unbearable. I remember a woman I once spoke to who shared a story about a man she had loved deeply. They had been inseparable for years. There was laughter, deep conversations, shared dreams. But one day, he simply stopped responding. No explanation, no goodbye, just silence. At first, she thought he was busy, that maybe something came up. But days turned into weeks and still no word. She reached out, hoping to hear from him, but the silence only grew louder. It was in that silence that she began to doubt herself. It was in that silence that she began to lose her sense of worth. She wasn't sure what she had done wrong, but all she could feel was the emptiness, the absence of the connection they once shared. The silence was deafening because it left her with nothing but her own doubts and insecurities. But the silence also taught her something. It taught her that while the absence of someone can leave a hole in your life, it's the silence they leave behind that teaches you the most about yourself. Over time, she began to realize that her worth wasn't tied to someone else's ability to communicate with her. It was tied to her own ability to find peace in the noise of the world around her. Slowly, she learned to fill that silence with her own voice, her own strength, and her own understanding. And that's where the power lies. The silence may have hurt her at first, but it ultimately gave her the space to rediscover herself, to find a new sense of clarity and purpose, even in the absence of answers. And that's the truth that most people don't understand when they leave someone in silence. They're not just leaving them with an emotional void, they're forcing them to learn how to fill that void on their own. The silence is painful, yes, but it is also the opportunity for growth. It is the time when a person learns that they don't need someone else's validation, their words, or their presence to feel whole. They learn that the only voice they truly need to hear is their own. The silence left behind when someone disappears is not just the end. It's the beginning of something else. It's the beginning of healing, of self-discovery, of learning to be okay with the unanswered questions. It's in that silence that you begin to understand that sometimes no answers are the answer. Sometimes the space between the noise is where you'll find the most clarity. For many people, the thought of being alone is terrifying. It carries with it a sense of abandonment, of isolation, of being forgotten in a world that feels far too busy to care. Society, too, often reinforces the idea that loneliness is something to be avoided at all costs. We're conditioned to believe that being alone is a reflection of our failure to connect, our inability to keep relationships intact. But what happens when a person is forced into solitude, when the connections they once relied on are suddenly ripped away? Initially, it feels like a death, like a piece of who you were has been torn out of you. For a woman who's spent her life finding her worth in the eyes of others, being alone can feel like a direct challenge to her identity. She wonders if she's not enough, if the absence of others proves her invisibility, her irrelevance. Think about a woman who has always been surrounded by people, family, friends, lovers, colleagues. Her life has been a constant exchange of energy, of affection, of support. Her worth, in many ways, was tied to how she was seen by others. She wasn't just existing, she was being reflected back by the people around her. Their opinions of her, their need for her validated her place in the world. But then, one day, it all changes. A relationship ends, a friendship fades, or perhaps she finds herself living in a new city where the connections she once had are no longer a part of her daily life. The world that once seemed to orbit around her now feels distant, unfamiliar, and cold. At first, the isolation is suffocating. There are moments when the silence is unbearable. It feels like the walls are closing in, like the weight of her own thoughts is too much to bear. She's confronted with the raw truth that she is, for the first time in a long time, truly alone. And for a while, it's painful. She questions her worth. She wonders what she did wrong. She second-guesses her ability to connect. But as the days stretch on, something shifts. The loneliness that once felt like a wound begins to take on a different shape. It no longer feels like abandonment. Instead, it starts to feel like space. Space for her to breathe, to think, to explore. Slowly, the fear that once held her captive begins to loosen its grip. She starts to realize that her worth isn't tied to someone else's presence in her life. It never was. She was never defined by her relationships. She was defined by who she was in those relationships. And now, without them, she's faced with the opportunity to reconnect with herself. It's in this solitude that she discovers her own strength. She learns to sit with herself without feeling the need to fill the silence with distractions, with empty conversations, with the noise of external validation. She begins to realize that her voice, her thoughts, her dreams, all of these things have value, even when no one else is there to hear them. She finds comfort in her own company, peace in her own thoughts, and strength in her own presence. The solitude that once terrified her becomes a space where she can hear herself clearly for the first time in a long time. For many women, this shift doesn't happen overnight. It's a process, sometimes slow, sometimes painful, but always transformative. It might start with small steps. An evening spent reading a book she's been meaning to pick up for months, a weekend spent exploring her city alone, a day spent doing something she loves without anyone else by her side. These moments, at first, feel uncomfortable. She might feel the urge to call a friend, to fill the space with noise, but she resists, and slowly she begins to see the value in her own company. One example I recall is of a woman who, after the end of a long-term relationship, found herself living alone for the first time in years. At first, she spent her evenings staring at the walls, feeling the weight of her isolation. She missed the companionship, the shared experiences, the little moments of connection that had once been a part of her daily routine. But over time, she began to explore new hobbies, things she'd always wanted to try but never had the chance to. She started taking long walks in nature, finding peace in the rhythm of her footsteps. She spent time learning to cook new recipes, filling her home with scents that made her feel grounded. Eventually, she began to write, a hobby she had once loved but had put aside in the chaos of her busy life. What started as a forced period of solitude became an opportunity for rediscovery. She started to understand that her value didn't come from being validated by others. Her worth was intrinsic. It was there whether she was in a relationship or single, whether she had a crowd of friends or was spending her evenings alone. She discovered a deeper connection with herself than she had ever had before. And through this process, her fear of being alone transformed. What once felt like a painful separation from others became a journey towards self-empowerment. She learned to trust herself, to find strength in her own decisions, and to believe in her own abilities. She realized that solitude wasn't the absence of something. It was the presence of everything she needed to be whole. The strength that came from standing on her own was more powerful than any external validation she could have received. Solitude gave her the space to heal, to grow, and to reconnect with her true self. It became clear that she wasn't just surviving her time alone, she was thriving. She was no longer a woman defined by who was beside her, but by who she had become within her own space. And in that space, she found freedom, the freedom to be herself, without apology, without the need for anyone else's approval. She learned to embrace the silence, the stillness, and the beauty of being alone. She no longer feared solitude. She had come to understand that it was in those quiet moments that she could hear her own voice the loudest. She had learned to be her own safe space. And in doing so, she discovered a strength that no one could take away from her. For so long, she believed that her value was something that could be measured by the people around her. The way they saw her, how they loved her, how they needed her. In the relationship she had with you, there was always this subtle yet constant exchange of energy. She was validated by your affection, by the moments you shared, by the intimacy that seemed to ground her. She felt seen in your eyes, heard in your presence, and understood in your touch. It was almost as if her worth was woven into the fabric of the connection you two shared. But when that connection faded, when you disappeared from her life, something deep inside her shattered. She found herself grappling with a realization she hadn't been prepared for. The absence of you revealed a profound truth about herself. Her worth had never been about you, or anyone else for that matter. The first days or weeks after you left were filled with emptiness, confusion, and a sense of losing control. She questioned everything. If I meant something to you, why did you walk away? What did I lack that made you leave? These questions lingered in her mind like a constant refrain. Her self-esteem, which she had so often drawn from your love and attention, now seemed fragile, as if it had been built on the shifting sand of someone else's affection. It wasn't just the absence of you that left her in pain. It was the fear that she was less than, that she wasn't good enough, or that she wasn't worthy of love in the first place. But as the days passed, as the silence grew louder, she began to notice something she had never seen before, the strength that had always been there, hidden beneath the doubts and the insecurities. She began to realize that her worth was never dependent on someone else's opinion of her. It wasn't about being loved or needed by another person to feel validated. It wasn't about waiting for someone to choose her to remind her that she was deserving. Slowly, she started to see that her value was intrinsic, something that had existed within her all along, whether or not someone was there to see it. Think about a woman who's spent years in a relationship where her partner's approval meant everything to her. She would go out of her way to make them happy, to fulfill their needs, to make them proud. She believed that if she could just be what they wanted, if she could just make them feel valued, then she would be valued in return. But when that partner leaves, when their approval no longer exists, she's left with an uncomfortable truth. She doesn't know how to define herself outside of their perception of her. This is where the real work begins. The moment she realizes that she's still worthy, even in the absence of validation, is the moment she begins to reclaim her power. It's a slow process, one that doesn't happen overnight. It requires her to confront the very things she once believed about herself, the stories she told herself about her value being attached to someone else. It requires vulnerability, the willingness to sit with the discomfort of not knowing where her worth comes from, not having someone to affirm it. And in that silence, in that space, she begins to build something even more profound: self-acceptance. One day, it becomes clear to her. She's walking through her life doing something she loves, and for the first time in a long while, she feels a sense of peace. She doesn't need to explain herself to anyone. She doesn't need to prove her worth to anyone. She finds joy in the things that make her feel alive, not because someone else will notice, but because she notices. It's in the quiet moments when she's by herself that she begins to reconnect with who she truly is. She starts to celebrate her own achievements, big and small, without the need for external validation. She looks in the mirror, not to check her appearance, but to see the woman she's becoming: strong, capable, independent. She realizes that she's always been enough, even when she felt like she wasn't. This transformation isn't always easy. It's not without moments of doubt, of longing for the love she thought she had lost. There are days when she still wonders if she was good enough, if she made the right choices, or if things could have turned out differently. But with each passing day, she gets stronger. She learns that she doesn't need someone else's approval to feel good about herself. Her worth is not based on the love of others. It's based on her ability to love and accept herself, flaws, mistakes, and all. Think about the story of a woman I once spoke with who had been in a relationship where her partner's love was conditional. She always felt like she had to prove her worth through actions, through appearances, through sacrifice. But when that relationship ended, she felt like she had lost a piece of herself. For a while, she was lost in the grief of the breakup, questioning her value. She looked back on the relationship and wondered, what did I do wrong? Why wasn't I enough? But over time, she began to realize something important. She was always enough. She didn't need to be validated by anyone else's love or approval. Her worth was not contingent on being chosen by someone else. It was inherent. It was her ability to stand on her own, to love herself, and to recognize that her happiness was her responsibility, not someone else's. As she embraced this realization, she started to reclaim the parts of herself she had neglected. She took up hobbies she had abandoned, pursued passions she had put aside, and started to prioritize her own happiness. She no longer sought validation from others. Instead, she started to validate herself, to recognize her own worth without needing anyone to affirm it. The woman she became was more than enough. She wasn't defined by someone else's love. She was defined by her own strength, her own resilience, and her own self-worth. And that's the lesson she teaches us all. We are not defined by the presence of others. Our worth is not dependent on who chooses us, who loves us, or who stays with us. It is defined by how we see ourselves, how we love ourselves, and how we honor our own journey. When we understand that our worth is intrinsic and not tied to anyone's presence, we become unstoppable. We become the best versions of ourselves, not because of anyone else's affirmation, but because we've finally recognized the truth we are enough, just as we are. When most people think of heartbreak, they imagine a rupture, a fracture, a wound that never heals. They envision a heart breaking into pieces, a jarring split that leaves one with an empty void, a gaping hole. But there's another kind of heartbreak, one that is less about the tearing apart of the heart and more about its expanding, stretching to accommodate pain, sorrow, loss, and growth. It's not the kind of heartbreak that leaves someone smaller or less capable. It's the kind that makes a person bigger, stronger, more resilient. It's the kind of heartbreak that doesn't destroy, but transforms. This is the kind of heartbreak she experiences when you walk away, when someone she trusted and loved disappears from her life. In the beginning, it feels like a fracture. She's confused, disoriented, lost in the swirl of emotions. The world she once knew feels foreign, and for a while, she wonders if she'll ever find her footing again. But what she doesn't realize in that moment is that this pain, this loss, is not something that will break her. It is something that will expand her heart in ways she never thought possible. Think of a woman who has invested years of her life in a relationship, giving love, time, and energy to someone she thought she would never lose. When they disappear, whether through a breakup or some other form of separation, she feels like the foundation beneath her crumbles. The questions begin to pile up. Why did this happen? Was I not enough? Why did it end like this? It's natural to wonder these things. It's natural to feel like you've been broken by someone's absence. But what begins to unfold over time is something extraordinary. Over the weeks, as the initial shock of the loss begins to fade, she starts to notice something strange happening within her. The sharp pain that once seemed all-consuming starts to dissipate, not because the hurt is gone, but because it's transforming. She starts to realize that her heart is not the same. It's not smaller or weaker, it's bigger. The capacity she has to love, to feel empathy, to understand others is expanding. It's as if the space where her pain once lived is now making room for new emotions, new experiences, and a deeper understanding of herself. It's in this space that she begins to grow in ways she never expected. Her heart, instead of being confined to the space where it once beat for someone else, starts to open up. She begins to realize that love is not something that can be given away only to return. Love, true love, is not a transaction. It's a force, an energy that radiates out and, over time, fills the empty spaces within. The loss she felt is not one that leaves her with nothing. It leaves her with the knowledge that love doesn't disappear when a person does. Love remains within her, expanding beyond the bounds of what she once thought she knew. Take, for instance, the story of a woman I know who found herself in a toxic relationship for years. She loved deeply, giving everything to the person she was with, even though she often felt drained, unappreciated, and unseen. She tried to make it work, clinging to the hope that her love would be enough to change things. But one day, he walked away, leaving her devastated. In the aftermath, she was angry, heartbroken, confused. She questioned her worth and wondered if she would ever be able to trust someone again. The grief felt like a weight she couldn't carry. But as time went on, something began to shift. She started to look inward instead of outward. She began to heal by focusing on herself. She discovered a passion for painting, something she had long put off. She took up yoga and meditation, learning to connect with her body and mind in new ways. She reconnected with old friends and found joy in their company again, laughing, reminiscing, and feeling the warmth of true connection. Through all of this, her heart didn't shrink or become more guarded. It grew. She was learning to love herself in ways she had never done before, and in doing so, she was rediscovering the fullness of her heart. Her heart didn't break. It expanded. She learned that her capacity to love wasn't something that depended on the presence of another person. She realized that when one door closed, 1,000 others opened. She could love herself more fully. She could love her friends more deeply. She could love her passions and her dreams with an intensity she had never felt before. The loss of one relationship didn't limit her ability to love. It made room for a love that was all-encompassing and unselfish, one that started from within. This kind of growth isn't just about finding someone new, although that may come in time. It's about learning to fill the space left behind by someone else with something even more meaningful: self-respect, self-love. and an understanding that her worth doesn't depend on anyone else. Her heart, once focused entirely on another, now begins to center on herself. She becomes her own source of comfort and validation, a realization that's as liberating as it is empowering. She learns that love isn't something you give away to be filled by someone else. It's something that starts inside you and radiates out, touching everything and everyone around you. She also begins to notice something else as her heart expands. The world doesn't stop turning when one person leaves. She sees the beauty of life unfolding in new ways. The sun feels warmer, the days seem brighter, and even the simple pleasures become more profound. Her relationships with others deepen. She finds herself more compassionate, more understanding, and more patient, not just with others, but with herself as well. Her heart, no longer weighed down by the fear of loss, begins to beat with a new rhythm, one that's filled with hope, resilience, and the unwavering belief that she has the strength to keep moving forward. It's not to say that the pain doesn't still linger at times, or that there won't be moments of sadness or longing. There will be. But the difference now is that she understands that the pain doesn't define her. It refines her. It doesn't break her. It makes her more whole, more connected to the essence of who she truly is. Her heart has expanded, and in that expansion, she has discovered a power, a strength, and a love that nothing and no one can take away from her. She may have lost someone she loved, but what she gained in the process is something far greater. The ability to love herself and the world around her in a way that only someone who has been through heartbreak and come out stronger on the other side can understand.